Now, I know that people might not be ready for the best paint in the world, and I know for a fact that they might not have expected the Army Painter to do it.
And here they are, the Army Painter Fanatic paints. Now, firstly, a huge thank you to Army Painter for sending me the Fanatic Mega Paint set, which has got 50 of the brand new War Paint Fanatic in it. Now, it's a bold claim from Army Painter founder Bo Pensloff that these are potentially the best paints in the world. We're going to find out. We're going to paint some models. We're not going to worry about the science. We're just going to see how the paints work, how they apply, and have a little look at some of the results that I can get with them. So we've got a nice array of colours in this box set, so I'm really excited to give them a go and put them to the test. Now, the paints work on a flexible triad system, which means for each colour there are 6 different paints, going from a dark version all the way to a bright version. What's really, really nice on the labels for these paints is it tells you which flexible triad they belong to. But there's also a description on the label that describes what the paint looks like. This is great because it really helps you visualize what the paint's going to look like before it comes out of the pot. They're the standard Army Painter bottles and they've already got mixers in them, so let's have a little look. Now, one of the big claims from the Army Painter is that these paints have all got the same consistency. Now, if you've got other branded paints, you'll know that they don't all come out of the pot the same. Some need a lot more water, some need less water. So it'll be interesting to see how these come out of the Army Painter bottles. And so far, they're coming out quite nicely. Now, they all do actually look the same. Of course, I've given them a little bit of a shake. I've popped them on my Vortex mixer as well. And yeah, from what I can see coming out, they do look very similar. So just adding a little bit of water into them, and you can see that they thin down quite nicely. They don't separate too much. And they actually mix up quite nicely as well. And that's going to be important because I don't have all of the colours. So I'm just wondering how I'm going to actually paint some of these models. So it'll be a little bit of an adventure, and I'm actually quite looking forward to it. Now, I had a game of Crisis Protocol with my good friend Elliot, so I thought it would be really good to paint up my own team. So we're going to make a start and we're going to use those models in these videos. So the first two I'm going to paint are Thor and Hulk, because that's going to give me a nice spread of paints to see how they work. So let's have a go at Thor's cloak. And we're going to paint this red, and it's quite a vibrant red, so we'll see what we can get. We're going to use some Wyvern Fury to start with, which I think is the darkest red in the pack that I've got. Now you can see this part of the cool red, so let's see how it applies. So it paints quite nicely. It doesn't quite cover in one coat, so I'm not sure if that's because I've thinned it down too much or whether just the red doesn't have the coverage that some of the other colours have. Because if you've seen any of the marks in material, you can see that they actually do cover it fantastically well. But perhaps I've thinned this down a little too much, or I've not used a big enough brush. So we'll move on next to Pure Red, which is again part of the cool red. So it's in the same triad as that Wyvern Red. And let's have a look how this applies. So obviously I've put a second coat of the Wyvern Red down. Now this Pure Red, again, it applies quite nicely. And because it's going on top of that Wyvern Red, this is actually covering in one coat, which is really, really nice. And the jump isn't too bad either. So as I layer this on, it's giving me a nice bump in highlight and giving me a really nice vivid red cloak. So to highlight the red, I've got a couple of options. So I need to make a decision. You know, I could use the lava orange or the volcanic yellow. I could use ice yellow, but I think that'll just push it a little bit too bright and it'll desaturate it. So I think I'll stick with lava orange because it's on the same kind of trend as the Pure Red that I've previously used. So let's see how this goes. Again, this applies really, really nicely. Now I'm using it fairly sparingly because I don't want to go too wild with it. So I'm just making sure I've got a good point on my brush, but it's actually applying really, really nicely. I'm actually a big fan of this. I really like how these paints mix. I like the consistency, and I do like how they actually apply to the model itself. I'm going to shade the model with Basilisk Red, which is actually the darkest of the reds, not the Wyvern. This, again, is part of that same triad. So in theory, it should look okay once I paint it in. Now I'm going to thin it down a little bit just to keep it fairly, not quite glaze-like, but I don't want to overpower those shadows. So working it in there, it does look really nice. It applies really well again, which is, again, across all the red colours I've used, application is really nice and smooth, which is important. I'm not really happy with the depth of colour. I think it probably needs a little bit more to it. To that end, I've added a touch of black into the Basilisk Red. And again, I'm keeping this fairly thin and working it into the deepest recesses there. It was while I was doing this that I made I won't call it a startling discovery, but a very nice discovery, in that these paints seem to blend quite nicely, and they can actually, you can glaze over and into, and you get a really nice blending effect without too much effort. Now, this isn't going to win you any painting competitions. You can obviously go back and do a bit more, but just doing this really quickly, I'm really surprised in a very good way at how nicely they do blend into each other. So we'll see if we can exploit that a little more across these models. Just going to do a final highlight with some lava orange on its own, just to make that red pop a bit. That's the cloak finished, and it's a very nice vibrant red for not a lot of effort. Now I can go back in and tidy it up and make sure that there's not too many differences in the colour and that they blend in quite nicely. But yeah, for a first try and literally trying to mix some bits and pieces, I'm really, really happy with this. So let's try some of the other colours. Let's do Thor's bodysuit. So I'm going to take some Thunderous Blue and I'm just going to paint this all over it. Now again, this applies really nicely. It is covering really nicely as well. I really, really like this. It's going on nice and smooth, and it's covering in one coat as well. So going over the black, whereas I didn't have that with red, I'm having it with the Thunderous Blue, which is great. I'm then going to take some Wolf Grey and highlight this. Now, in terms of the areas I'm highlighting, I'm just trying to focus on things that will catch the most light. There's a few creases on it as well, so I want to get those highlighted. And when I've finished that, I'm going to do his trousers, and the colour I'm going to do his trousers is Abyssal Blue. Now is an opportunity to try one of the new washes. So I'm going to take Dark Tone, which is a black wash. I'm going to paint this all over that bodysuit that I've just painted and highlighted, and this should help blend it down into the colours underneath. Again, I've not got a huge amount of experience with Army Painter washes, but I do quite like how this applies. It's runnier than something like Null Oil from Citadel because the new formula is made with contrast medium, and I'm not a huge fan of that, but actually this one works really, really nicely. When that's completely dry, I'm going to reapply some of those highlights using the Wolf Grey, but I'm making sure I've got a very good tip on my brush, and I want to paint them inside the previous Wolf Grey highlights. And this is just going to give me a nice little transition and will help it pop. And doing this, one of the things jumping out at me from these paints is, because they've got such good pigment density, they've got really good consistency, it makes them really good for highlighting. You can get a good tip on your brush, and you've got a lot of control. So with some paints, they are hard to control. You might spill them over the edges, but with these, they're really, really nice. And I've got to say, I'm quite impressed with this as well. I'm actually really happy with how this is coming together. This was an experiment for me, but I'm actually really chuffed with this Thor model. I'm really, really happy. So let's do his trousers then. So I'm going to take some Abyssal Blue just to base them. And then once I've based them, I'm going to highlight them with some Hydra Turquoise. Now, I'm not going to worry about washing them. I'm just going to leave them as they are. And again, I'm really happy with how they've turned out. There's not a huge amount of effort going in from my part here. I'm picking colours, yes. I am having to mix them, yes. But the result is really, really good. And the paint has got a lot to do with that. We're going to get onto one of the areas I'm really keen to look at, and that's the metallics. Now, in this box, you only get 3 metallics. You get bronze, gold, and silver. Now, I'd like a darker silver to base and then the plate mail to highlight it, but I haven't got that. So what I've done is mixed a little bit of the black paint into the silver, and it's applying really nicely. Again, I think the black is probably helping the coverage a little bit, but in terms of how it goes on to the metallic areas on Thor, it's really, really nice. And again, you've got a lot of control over it, so you don't have to thin it down too much. Don't worry about it running off. Something like dark aluminium from Vallejo is great, but you do have to be careful with it. I'm then going to take the black wash, the dark tone, and wash all of the silver and the boots just to tie them all together and obviously get that metal shaded as well. When it's completely dry, I'm going to go back to the pure plate mail and highlight all of the silver elements. And again, this is going over the previous layer of silver, so it's covering really nicely. Again, I'm not working overly hard, but I'm getting really nice results. I can just focus on enjoying myself, and actually, that's one of the big things I'm noticing about these paints. I'm really enjoying using them. I'm enjoying experimenting. I'm really enjoying the results I'm getting. The last colours I'm going to show you on Thor are the flesh colours. So I'm going to start off by basing it all using Topaz Skin, which is a nice reddy brown colour. And again, this is going on really nicely. It is covering well with just one coat, so I'm not having to worry about going on putting multiple coats on. Now, When I paint Hulk, we're going to experiment a little bit using thinner layers, but for Thor, I'm just happy to put on these nice, chunky, thick layers, and that is starting to base up really nicely. I'm then going to shade it all using strong skin tone shade. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to look. I think it may push it too dark because Thor's got quite fair skin, but we're going to give it a go. It's in the box. I want to try as much of the paints as I can. So just putting it on now, it does look a little dark, but it is settling really nicely into the recesses. So now that's completely dry, I'm going to go back to topaz skin and highlight it up, only leaving that wash in the deepest recesses. I'm going to start highlighting the muscles using barbarian flesh. And generally, I'm covering quite large areas, leaving the darker colours in the recesses. So this is how I'd just standard skin painting, really. But again, what I'm really interested to see is how these colours will blend. So if I put too much of the highlight colour on, I can just take a little bit of topaz skin and just blend over those edges, and it just feathers it down really nicely. And again, there's not a huge amount of effort in this. This is just working really nicely. I'm going to move on to Dorado skin for the final highlight. This is a nice bright flesh colour. And again, I'm just focusing on those parts of muscles that are going to catch the most light. And I'm focusing on some of the musculature as well, just to build up the volumes on them. I'm really happy with how this has come together. I might just push that brightness a little bit. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of white into that Dorado flesh. Now, it is going to desaturate it a little bit, but I'm only going to add a very tiny amount in. And I've watered it down a little bit as well. So it's not quite a glaze. It's more kind of a layer consistency, I guess. I'm just going to add this very sparingly to the brightest areas. So that's Thor complete. I'm really surprised. I'm really happy with how he's come out. Now, I've painted a lot of models, and it's not often I look at it and think, well, do you know what? I'm really chuffed with that. I'm really happy with how it's come out. That's special. That model means a lot. I'm going to use this in a game. So, yeah, that's not something I expected to come out of this video. Perhaps it's because I'm having to work at some of it. Perhaps it's because I'm having to think more, so the reward is greater. I don't know. But genuinely happy with how Thor has come out. And I hope you agree. He looks fantastic. I did have to use a little bit of matte varnish on his cloak because the finish was a little too glossy for my liking. But apart from that, everything is as it was with the paint. So far, zero complaints. Let's move on to Hulk then and have a look at the magenta/purples and the green. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint the entirety of Hulk using magenta. Now, I have thinned this down a little bit, and we are painting it over a Mechanicus grey coat. So this is going over quite nicely. It's not covering perfectly, so I will need a second coat, but it is looking quite decent. Now, I'm yet to find a range of green paints that I absolutely love and trust the consistency of, so I'm really keen to see how these go. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint all of Hulk's flesh with green skin. Now, this is covering quite nicely. I do think I'm going to have to put a second coat on, but that's not going to be the worst thing in the world, because what I'll do is I'll just focusing on the areas that are going to catch the most light, and in the deepest recesses, I'll leave some of that magenta colour showing through, because it'll really accentuate, I think, some of the shadow areas. Yeah, that second coat is really helping to solidify, and it's quite a nice green as well, so if I'm thinking about painting a Dark Angel's cloak for a certain Primarch, this could be the mid-tone I use. Next up, I'm going to take a darker green. I'm going to take Angel's green. I'm going to paint this into those recesses, but I've thinned it down quite a bit to glaze consistency. So I'm just going to work it into all those recesses and see how it looks. Again, this is an experiment. It's just a test. I'm not an expert. I'm just using these paints. It's literally the first time I've used some of these paints, so it's not like I've had months to practice. So this is going quite nicely into the recesses. I'm not 100% convinced, and I am probably going to have to tidy up with some green skin after as well. So now we're at the point I'm really excited about, which is highlighting up the Hulk's flesh. Now, if you've seen the box art for the Crisis Protocol Mini, Hulk has got a very bright, vibrant, almost hallucinogenic green colour. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but I am going to try and get it nice and bright. So the first thing I've done is mix 2 parts green skin with 1 part rainforest, which is kind of like a nice lime green. I'm going to paint all across the model, painting in the musculature. Now I'm focusing on those areas that are going to catch the most light, because that's going to give me nice transitions to the darker green underneath. And I'm focusing on painting in the musculature as well, and the volumes and the sinews and some of the fibers, because that's really going to help it pop. Next up, I'm going to take a 50-50 mix of greenskin and rainforest. You can see how this is going. I'm going to do exactly the same as the previous step. I'm going to cover the same areas, but I'm really going to focus it again on the parts that catch the most light, because we're going to start to build the highlights. We're going to get more and more focused as we go through. Again, you can see the green is starting to lighten, but it's not starting to become so stark against the shadows. The next stage is 2 parts rainforest to 1 part greenskin, and this is where you can really start to see that green pop. So again, we're just painting in horizontal lines, we're not painting in whole layers. And again, I've made some mistakes at this stage, but it's really easy to take some of the previous mixes and just feather them over those edges and blend some of those mistakes down, which again is really fantastic and really nice. I'm really impressed that you can do that with the paint. Okay, now it's time to be bold. It's pure rainforest. So as you can see, I'm focusing on the areas that catch only the most light, and I'm going to go back and do the face as well, because I think that needs to be a statement part of this model. But you can see this nice yellowy green fits in quite nicely, and it doesn't look out of place across the rest of the model. Now I have thinned this down a little bit, so as it dries it will blend down as well, but so far so good. Really happy with how vibrant Hulk's flesh is starting to look. And for the last step, I'm just going to mix a little bit of ice yellow into that rainforest. Again, this is only going to go in those areas that catch the most light. So Hulk's flesh is looking really nice and vibrant. Now I could, if I wanted, just take a step back and take the airbrush maybe and blend some of that green a little bit better. But do you know what? I'm really happy with the kind of the rough look on it, and I'm happy with some of the blends. Really chuffed. That's exactly how it looked in my mind. And the fact that I was able to do it without really knowing the paints is just amazing. So I'm going to paint his pants now. So I'm going back to that magenta and just highlighting them up. I did put some dark tone over them just to shade them down. So I'm just going to go back with magenta and just get them up nice and solid. Now I didn't have a highlight color for the magenta, so I just took a little bit of that ice yellow from the previous stage and mixed that in. So it's a little too bright, but I'm just going to focus on the folds. And again, the beauty of these paints are, if it's too stark, I can just feather across them with the pure magenta and it'll blend down quite nicely. So that's Hulk done. And barring 1 or 2 improvements, I am absolutely thrilled with how he has turned out. I cannot believe just using these paints has helped me achieve something like this. I'm really, really happy. It's just fantastic. Everything on this model is Fanatic. Everything on Thor was Fanatic. Even the basing as well. It's just great. I'm really enjoying these. So I was conscious I hadn't actually tried any of the blues. So I thought, let's fix that and paint Captain America's bodysuit. So the first thing I do is taking Imperial Navy, and I'm going to paint this all over the blue parts of the suit. Now this model is from Earth's Mightiest Heroes, so it's a little bit of an upgraded suit in terms of the colour scheme, but we're just going to focus on the blue. Now I washed it with dark tone again, and then I've gone back to the Imperial Navy blue and just started to highlight it up, leaving that dark tone in the recesses. The next highlight is a 50-50 mix of Crystal Blue and Imperial Navy. Now these come from the Vibrant Blue range, so they should work together quite nicely. And it's applying fantastically well. I'm just really focused on big, broad areas at the moment rather than refining anything. I can always go back in and add more highlights or blend them back down later as I'm working my way through it. The next highlight is with pure Crystal Blue, and this is where I'm starting to do the same thing I did on Hulk, where I'm painting those horizontal lines just to build up some of the musculature and some of those muscle fibers rippling underneath the suit. Because this is a nice way of doing a highlight, so without it being completely blended, but as you add the lighter colours on top, it really starts to pop and stand out. I'm going to put a 1-to-1 mix of bright sapphire and crystal blue on next. Now this is a lot lighter, so I may have to blend this back a touch, but it seems okay. Again, I'm focusing on those horizontal strokes just to build up some of those volumes, particularly across the chest and that left leg, which is very pronounced stepping forward. And lastly, I'm just going to take a little bit of bright sapphire and focus this in a very small area, such as across the shoulders and the top of the chest. Now, if you do put too much on, you can always go blend back over it. But again, I've achieved a really nice blue bodysuit without a huge amount of effort, just using the paints I've got. And I think when I paint the rest of this, it'll tie it in really nicely. So again, I'm thrilled with the result. So what can I say about the Fanatic paint range? Are they the best paints in the world? I don't know, because I've not tried every paint in the world. And every painter likes different paint for their consistency. But I'll tell you one thing, this is the most fun I've had painting miniatures in a long time. And the results are fantastic. It's not because I'm special, it's because the paint is really good, and it goes down really nicely, and it covers fantastically well, and you can work up those highlights to get some great results. Now, you might need to get a little bit inventive in terms of getting some of the highlight colours on there, but that's part of the fun and part of the experience I found. Now, am I going to go out and replace all of my paints with Fanatic? No, I'm not, because I've got a lot of paint. But what I am going to do is certainly look at the metallic range and see what they're like. I'm definitely going to invest in some more of the greens. And I think that as I run out of paints, I may slowly replace them, because these are great paints. So I'm looking forward to using more of them. If you've used Fanatic, let me know down in the comment section. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Again, a huge thank you to Army Painter for sending these out to me. Now, I was under no obligation to do a review. I was under no obligation to say anything in particular. This is purely my opinion. I am absolutely thrilled. Hulk and Thor have turned out fantastically well. I'm so happy. I can't wait to finish Captain America now because of how nicely the other two have come out. I'm going to have a really, really good looking Crisis Protocol team. And I'm just fantastic. So yeah, give some of them a try. You don't have to buy them all, wait for them to come out individually and buy a couple here or there. But for me, absolutely glowing. I can't wait to try more of them. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this review of the Army Painter Fanatic. We'll paint some more models next time, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you. I'll see you soon.